What is dyslexia and dyscalculia? Dyslexia is a learning disorder that affects a person's ability to read, spell, and write. It happens because the brain has trouble connecting letters and sound, but it does not affect a person's intelligence. Dyscalculia, on the other hand, affects a person's ability to understand numbers and math. People with this disability may struggle with number patterns, math facts, and concepts like time or money.
Dyslexia means difficulty with words, and dyscalculia means difficulty with counting. They're both neurodevelopmental disorders. This just means their brain develops differently. It affects how a person processes information. For example, a child with dyslexia will have problems with language-based skills, such as reading, writing, spelling, or processing phonics. And a child with dyscalculia will have problems with math-based skills, such as understanding numbers and math concepts. These two disorders kind of affect each other. For example, a child with dyslexia would have problems with math because math have word problems and vice versa. This timeline shows the history of dyslexia and dyscalculia. The blue dots on top represents dyslexia, and the black dots on the bottom represents dyscalculia. These two disorders normally coexist and influence each other. Yet, dyscalculia is not very well known. One of the reasons why I think it's not very well known is because of the difference in time when they were first researched. In the late 1800s, Adolphe Cosmal and Rudolf Bulling were the first to refer to the difficulties with reading and spelling as word blindness and dyslexia respectively. While it took almost 60 years later for the word dyscalculia to be introduced by Joseph Ertzmann. Although I believe Solomon Heinzens deserves some credit because he was the first person to record his observation of people having difficulties with math and numbers in 1919. The next reason is more research and funding is put into dyslexia. In the early 1960s, McDonald Critchley and Thomas Miles opened the first Word Blindness Center. This was a research facility used to provide evidence and support on dyslexia. Miles also opened another center in Bangkok in 1974. This is where he created the first dyslexia assessment tool, and it is still used today. Also, educators were trained at this facility to help their students. However, nothing like this was done for dyscalculia. Although Ladislav-Koss did identify 6 types of dyscalculia in 1974, which helped us understand this disorder, nothing in this time period was done to help and train educators. The last reason dyslexia has a consensus definition, which was established in 1968, but dyscalculia does not. This makes researching dyscalculia complicated because one research may focus on the neurological causes and another may focus on the math difficulties. That is why the number of people affected with this disorder varies from one research to another. What has helped these two disorders are advances in neuroscientific technologies and their inclusion in the DSM-5 edition. Between the 1980s and 2000, technologies such as MRI and CT scans have helped prove the theory that these disorders are actually neurological. Also, they are included in the DSM-5 edition under specific learning disorder, which makes diagnosing and getting support and services for these students much easier. There are 5 types of dyslexia: developmental, acquired, phonological, surface, and mixed. Developmental dyslexia is the most common type, and it is caused by genetics. It impairs how the brain develops. Acquired dyslexia, as the word implies, is acquired from either a brain injury or illness. A student who has phonological dyslexia have difficulties with phonemic awareness, such as decoding and sounding of words. Surface dyslexia is where a student reads very slow because they have problems remembering sight words such as said or asked. Mixed dyslexia is the most severe because it is a combination of both phonological and surface dyslexia. There are three types of dyscalculia: developmental, acquired, and pseudo-dyscalculia. Developmental dyscalculia is divided into two categories: primary and secondary. Primary developmental dyscalculia is caused by genetics, so it is an internal factor. Because of the way a person's brain develops, they would have problems with things like basic math. However, secondary developmental dyscalculia is caused by an external factor, such as ADHD or dyslexia. For example, a child with ADHD might struggle with math because he's unable to focus. Acquired dyscalculia, just like acquired dyslexia, is caused by a brain injury or illness. Pseudo-dyscalculia is more psychological. This is where a student gets severe anxiety just thinking about math. In 1974, Coss identified 6 subtypes: verbal, graphical, practognostic, lexical, adiagnostical, and operational. Verbal dyscalculia is self-explanatory. This is where a student cannot verbalize math. They understand it, but they cannot speak it. Graphical dyscalculia is the opposite. This is where a student cannot write math. Practognostic dyscalculia is where a child has a problem with quantity. For example, they cannot compare numbers, more than or less than. Lexical dyscalculia is where they can't read symbols. They confuse their plus and multiply sign, or the numbers 7 and 1. Adiagnostical dyscalculia, this is where a child can follow the steps in math, but don't understand the principle behind it. While operational dyscalculia is where a student cannot follow the steps in math. For example, they can't follow the steps to borrow or carry over a number when adding or subtracting. There are also 4 cognitive subtypes: core number sense, reasoning, memory, and visual spatial processing. Core number sense is where students don't understand the foundation of math, such as their numbers or quantities. They still use counters while their peers are doing mental math. Reasoning is where students cannot think logically or recognize patterns. Memory, this is where students have poor working and long-term memory. As they don't remember the steps, they can't solve a problem. And the last one is visual spatial processing. This is where a student can't visualize numbers or judge the distance of something. Because they can't visualize numbers, they have to use a specialized app just to tell the time. So everyone is affected by dyslexia and dyscalculia differently. That is why knowing the type or subtype a student has is important for tailoring their IEPs. Dyslexia and dyscalculia have specific signs and symptoms, and it varies in severity depending on where they are on the spectrum, as well as the type or subtype they have. But generally, students with dyslexia have speech delay, they mispronounce words, can't follow multi-step directions, they have problems learning their phonics, they skip lines or words when reading, and obviously are poor spellers. Those with dyscalculia generally have weak number sense, so things like judging how far something is challenging. They don't understand place value, and they still use their fingers and counters to add and subtract when everyone else has moved on to mental math. However, there are some similarities between these two disorders. They both affect working memory as well as sequencing. For example, They may have problems counting forward and backward, or they may have trouble remembering the order of the alphabet. Also, they both have slow processing speed, so they're slow readers, as it takes a lot of effort to pronounce words, or just to do basic math. Dyslexia is the most common learning disability. It affects 5 to 17% of children in America, compared to 6.9% with dyscalculia. There are many factors, but the two main factors that increases their chances are another learning disability and genetics. Learning disabilities such as ADHD, a language disorder, an auditory processing disorder, or autism all increases your chances. Also, genetics play a huge role. Someone who has a family member with dyslexia has a 40 to 80% chance of having dyslexia, and someone who has a family member with dyscalculia has a 32 to 38% chance of having dyscalculia. These two disorders are not curable, but students can develop adaptive strategies to help them reach their academic goals and to succeed in life.
There are a lot of misconceptions about dyslexia and dyscalculia. People with dyslexia see letters backwards. Dyslexia is mainly about how the brain processes language, not about eyesight. Dyslexia means someone isn't smart. Intelligence is not affected. Many people with dyslexia are highly creative and have strong problem-solving skills. Kids will grow out of dyslexia. It's lifelong, but with the right support, reading and writing can improve over time. People with dyslexia means that they're bad at math. It's a real learning disorder that affects their number processes, not their efforts. People with dyscalculia just needs more practice. More practice alone doesn't fix it. They need special strategies and support. Dyslexia is the same as dyscalculia. They are two complete different things. Dyslexia affects language. Dyscalculia affects math and numbers. Social, emotional, and academic challenges. Social challenges. Trouble keeping up in the classroom discussion. Feeling different from others. Avoiding reading or math activities in the group assignments. Emotional challenges. Having low self-esteem. Frustration or anxiety with schoolwork. Feeling embarrassed when asked to read or solve math problems. Academic challenges. Difficulties with reading fluently, spelling, or writing. Trouble with numbers sense, math, facts, time, or money. Needing more time to learn new skills. Also, slower processing, which makes classwork and tests harder. Legal and educational policy for dyslexia and dyscalculia or any other disorders people have. Idea: Individualize with Disability Education Act. Guarantee students with disability the rights to a free, appropriate public education. Allows eligible students to receive an IEP. Provides special education services, accommodations, and goals. ADA, Americans with Disability Act. Protects individuals with disabilities from discrimination in school, jobs, and public places. Requires schools and colleges to give reasonable accommodation. Section 504 Rehabilitation Act provides a 401 plan for students who don't need special education but still need accommodations. Helps with things like extended time, quieter testing rooms, or audiobooks.
Helping a student with dyslexia and Dyscalculia. First step, teach by step. Break reading and math into small and clear lessons. Use touch, sounds, and movement to help learning to get stick to their children. Use hands-on tools. Start with real objects like blobs or letter tile. Then use pictures and then move to numbers and letters. Teach in different ways. They allow showing with pictures or steps. Let students try it with their hands. Let the students show what they know. They can talk, draw, record, or act it out. Don't make reading and writing just only a way to answer. Make the classroom easier to use. Use a big, clear fonts and audios for reading, post number lines, and charts for math. Give extra times and quiet spacing when they need it. Use a helpful tool, text to speech, and speech to text, helping with reading and writing. Math app and virtual blog help with the student sense and teach the student how to use this tool on purpose. Words as a team, write it down, support with the EISPS plan, meet with the family specialist, use short and focused lessons, and check the program often. Check program often means use a quick check every few weeks, change the plan if a student aren't growing, train teachers to use this tool and the methods well. Teaching a student with dyslexia and Dyscalculia means being intentional and consistent and collaborative, with a structured lesson and visual support and with flexible tools. We can help every learning, growing in skill and confidence.
Now, as students, it's quite easy to read the information presented in this PowerPoint about dyslexia and dyscalculia and feel as if we have a general understanding of how a student may be impacted by these learning disabilities. However, in reality, these hardships these students face can only be understood by those who have struggled with a learning disability before. As important as it is to be well researched in these disabilities, we must also listen to first-hand accounts from students who have been impacted by dyslexia or dyscalculia in order to better understand how we can support our students to ensure they meet the academic standards their peers are held to. Meet Dylan. Dylan Ranford, a middle school alumni at Marin County Day School. Growing up, Dylan had struggled with his battle against dyslexia, impacting his middle school years. Dylan's dyslexia had made it difficult for Dylan to read and write compared to his peers, causing Dylan to not learn how to read until he was in 5th grade. Dylan was determined to overcome this barrier, however, and with the help of not only his teachers but his school community, Dylan was given the support to thrive academically. Dylan worked closely with his teachers to ensure he was receiving all the support and resources he needed to learn despite his disability. The school really wanted to focus on creating a judgment-free zone to ensure Dylan would not feel any shame or stigma towards his dyslexia. Through accommodations, the school provided his team of educators a dyslexia-friendly environment that made Dylan feel valued and validated rather than ashamed, focusing on his academic strengths compared to his academic weaknesses. As graduation came to a close, Dylan was expected to deliver a speech in front of his peers, and eventually Dylan was able to graduate with the rest of his peers, writing and delivering a speech that impressed his entire community of supporters in the crowd, and surprising Dylan himself as he could have never dreamed to have possibly made enough academic progress to be delivering a speech in front of his graduating class. For many students, such as Dylan, when offered the right support and resources, they were able to overcome the learning barriers they faced. However, it is important to note that the miseducation and stigmatization of these learning disabilities often prevent students from receiving the assistance they need. This is most notably present in cases of dyslexia. When Dr. Norwell first met Cheryl, she was a fourth grade student stuck doing kindergarten level math work. Cheryl had been diagnosed with dyslexia and dyscalculia from an early age, making her early experiences anything but pleasant from the start. Since dyscalculia isn't as known to the public compared to dyslexia, many of Cheryl's teachers, as well as the school's administrative staff, knew what dyslexia was but weren't familiar to dyscalculia or how to support a student with dyscalculia. As a result, Cheryl felt very isolated with no support system in place to help her guide her with her disability. Cheryl's teachers refused to give her grade level work until she proved to master the kindergarten math curriculum. With both her teachers and her parents frustrated, Cheryl felt defeated. With almost no hope left, Cheryl's parents moved her to a smaller private school in hopes to meet her learning needs. Here, Cheryl met Dr. Wall, who is a learning specialist who specializes in helping children with learning disabilities like Cheryl. Dr. Wall approached Cheryl with patience and compassion, something Cheryl was not used to. Dr. Wall first asked Cheryl about her feelings of math, asking her which topics she felt most confident in and which ones she wasn't so sure about. By meeting the students where they are, without judgment, Dr. Wall was able to validate Cheryl's feelings, frustrations about math without having to ask her to. Dr. Wall was offering Cheryl a place of comfort before even worrying about her math abilities. Cheryl had always been made feel ashamed of her academic progress, and by highlighting Cheryl's strengths instead of focusing on her weaknesses, Dr. Wall was able to make a breakthrough. Dr. Wall met with Cheryl once a week to work on different content areas. Through their time together, Dr. Wall was able to identify the disconnect between math concepts and overall fixed Cheryl's math foundation. Cheryl not only went to graduate fourth grade, but went on to fall in love with math, mastering any topic thrown her way. In conclusion, learning disabilities like dyslexia and dyscalculia are brain-based learning differences and are not a reflection of a student's intelligence. Students with dyslexia struggle with reading, spelling, and decoding words, while students with dyscalculia have trouble understanding numbers, counting, and basic math concepts. Early screenings and clear explanations help identify students' needs before a gap grows. Policies such as IDA and IEPs ensure students receive appropriate services. Appropriate services include, but are not limited to, step-by-step multisensory lessons for reading and hands-on, concrete to visual to symbol lessons for math. Collaboration among teachers, specialists, and families, along with regular process monitoring, helps students build skills, confidence, and long-term successes. Students like Cheryl and Dylan are only a small example of students who are able to overcome learning barriers when given the right resources.